Howdy and hello everyone. I have a good feeling you recognize what this is. This is a Siemens Charger locomotive, a locomotive series first introduced in 2016. This locomotive series is well known by rail fans and crews alike for being very problematic, with that mostly being true with the exception of a certain someone in that one state down there. This is an F125, another locomotive series also introduced in around 2016 that has a similar track record as the Charger, with it only being made for Metrolink in Southern California. These two examples are nowhere near the end of examples of new rolling stock in the US having major issues, and lucky for you, I have managed to pinpoint the reason why all of these issues are happening, and it revolves around a certain someone in Florida going by the name of Brightline. Up until around 2013, almost all US passenger railroads were utilizing equipment mostly built before 2001, with the exception of the MP36s used on various commuter railroads. Most of this equipment was created by domestic manufacturers such as EMD, GE, Budd, Pullman, and Bombardier, with a few exceptions. In around 2013, most passenger railroads, specifically Amtrak, America's national passenger rail organization, were looking to replace their old rolling stock, a good amount of which was almost 30 years old at that point and was really starting to show its age. With that, Amtrak started looking for someone to make a locomotive that was Tier 4 emissions, could reach high speeds, had modern software and hardware, and most importantly, was cheap. However, the 2010s were very different from the 1990s. In the 90s, the two go-to American locomotive manufacturers, GE and EMD, were very much willing to give Amtrak whatever new locomotive they needed. In the 2010s, both GE and EMD might as well have gone out of business from Amtrak's perspective because they were both only dabbing with the Class 1 freight railroads and were most likely unable to provide Amtrak with the product they wanted. So, in light of the huge success of the Siemens ACS-64 for Amtrak's electrified Northeast Corridor, Amtrak went back to Siemens to see if they could make Amtrak their new locomotive. In the end, Siemens agreed to start designing a new locomotive dubbed a quote-unquote Charger. Off the bat, one thing was for certain. Siemens did not make any form of diesel engines. The only equipment that Siemens didn't have to outsource major parts for were their electric locomotives. Because of this, Siemens went with Cummins for the Tier 4 engine to power this locomotive. I wonder why they went with Cummins specifically. The engine Siemens chose was a Tier 4 QSK 95 4-stroke diesel engine, which can run at a maximum of 4,400 horsepower. The Chargers got two initial orders. One was from the Amtrak state-supported services, i.e. Midwest, Cascades, and Caltrans, which got the SC44 model of Charger, which ran with a full 4,400 horsepower, and Brightline, a new privatized intercity rail service in Florida, which got the SCB40 model of Charger, which ran with only 4,000 horsepower thanks to Brightline wanting to use two Chargers to power a train set, leading to 8,000 horsepower per train set, which was more than enough. Locomotive 4601, a future Amtrak Midwest locomotive, was the prototype to be tested in Pueblo, Colorado, and Locomotive 4611, another future Amtrak Midwest locomotive, was tested along the Amtrak Cascades route for Charger certification. Once all of this was complete, the Chargers on Amtrak services went into service to mixed results. In the north, issues with engines freezing in cold conditions was an extremely common issue, and on Caltrans and Surfliner, locomotive issues were not any better, mainly mechanical issues from the locomotives prematurely aging. The only outlier was Brightline. Despite them being completely new to the rail scene, their Charger locomotives, despite them being near clones of the SC44s Amtrak bought, worked perfectly fine. Around the same time, Metrolink bought new quote-unquote EMD F125 locomotives. These, similar to the SC44s the Amtrak state-supported routes bought, also began service riddled with issues, leading to Metrolink having to bring their old F59 PHR locomotives back into service. In around 2019, Amtrak ordered a long-distance variant of the Charger along with a full order of Venture coaches, a type of coach that had been in use on Brightline's intercity service for years up to that point with no issue. But once these coaches arrived for Amtrak's Midwest and San Joaquin services, they not only had a delayed service start, but also had many issues continuing forward. However, this was most likely due to rushing on Siemens' part due to the sudden shift from Nippon Shiro to Siemens. And in the modern day, most of the equipment I mentioned that had issues still has issues. And, as I've been alluding to the whole video, the reason for why all of this new rolling stock is so unreliable can be proved by the railroad everyone knows and loves, Brightline. As I mentioned, Brightline has a full fleet of Siemens SCB-40 locomotives and Siemens Venture coaches, all of which have had little to no issues throughout their entire almost 8-year service lives. So let's get into some reasons on why this is. Starting off with a pretty obvious one that a good few of you have probably already noticed, the SCB-40s are essentially the SC-44s, but with 400 less horsepower, due to Brightline's train sets already having 2 SCBs running at once. The reason why this was done was because Brightline's train sets already had 8,000 horsepower, which was way more than enough for the service they wanted, meaning that lowering that from 8,800 horsepower to 8,000 horsepower wasn't that big of a problem when you consider the other factor in mind. That being, having less horsepower automatically means less wear and tear on the engine, leading to lower chances of engine problems down the line. Engine problems that have been extremely prominent with all of Amtrak's chargers, mainly the SC-44s on state-supported roofs. Now, let's dive into the 2 major things that Brightline does that Amtrak doesn't that explains why new US rolling stock has so many issues. The first of these 2 is Brightline's maintenance strategy. Starting off, all train sets return to either the Orlando or Miami maintenance facility. 1 set will always be out of service for maintenance, 7 will spend the night at Brightline's main facility in Orlando, and 2 will spend the night at the Miami maintenance facility. Notice how all the train sets are somewhere where they can be worked on if needed. Secondly, all train sets, even during operating hours, are turned off if they are idling for more than 20 minutes, and are put onto ground power. This highly reduces the wear and tear on the engines. Fun fact, idling for long periods of time can cause chargers in particular to have their engine cylinders scuff up against the engines, which can lead to major issues. The only exception to this shutting off rule is when air pressure or battery charge is too low. Continuing, periodic maintenance is spread up to a year in advance to ensure that there are necessary maintenance windows if something were to go wrong. This strategy has worked well enough that Brightline apparently doesn't have a plan B for anything that could go against this, cause they are quote unquote on it every day and have to have the same level of diligence. And to add on to this, Brightline also has a handy maintenance contract with Siemens, meaning that Siemens employees are always at their maintenance facilities working with Brightline employees. All of this leads to, as expected, Brightline's Ventures and Chargers working as intended by Siemens. In comparison, Amtrak will often leave train sets idling for hours, and in terms of maintenance outside of major facilities, they will pretty much just make sure the locomotive can run and has the necessary fuel and oil too. As a side note, this is not a knock to the actual Amtrak maintenance employees, as they are just doing as instructed, rather it's a knock on how Amtrak as a whole handles maintenance. Now of course you're probably thinking, well, why is this only a problem now? And that's because, as I mentioned, up until recently, Amtrak and many other railroads have had equipment built before 2002-ish, most of it based on designs built in the 90s, 80s, and sometimes even the 70s. Locomotives are way more complex and, most importantly, more costly and time-consuming to maintain. This leads us into our second point, and it's that Brightline puts far more money into their maintenance than Amtrak or anyone else does. This is why they're able to do such intense maintenance strategies, as they just have the money to do it and have put aside the money to be able to do all this cool maintenance that allows them to be able to maintain their equipment properly compared to Amtrak. It's the same way you wouldn't maintain a modern Ferrari like it's an old Honda Civic. Railroads shouldn't be maintaining all of this new European equipment with advanced tech and hardware like it's the same old GE or EMD loco from the 90s. And that's why we're seeing all of these locomotive failures, all of these falling apart coaches. Railroads in the US are stuck in the early 2000s with their maintenance strategies and spending. This is the reason why I cringe every time I see a famously underfunded railroad buy new equipment, because all I can think is how long till it breaks. Being completely honest, I think the strategy Amtrak decided on with going crazy on new equipment was a horrible idea, because Amtrak has nowhere near the amount of money to make it work without having mechanical issues left and right. The reason why Brightline is able to make their equipment work well is because they put a lot of money and time and work into their maintenance, a lot more than Amtrak and almost every other railroad that has new equipment does. I'm sure that the ALC-42s, SC-44s, F-125s, Ventures, and so forth would have had a great start, but until railroads realize that their maintenance strategies are the problem and not the people you're buying it from, Caltrans, we will continue to see this failure after failure after failure story until someone decides to change the way railroads maintain their equipment. Well, anyway, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video to kickstart my channel's return. While you're here, go check out the other 2 videos I uploaded the same day as this one, as I spent a lot of time on them, and I'd kind of like it if you went and watch those. So, without much left to say, I was 5008 Creations, you were the viewer, and I'll see you in the future. Goodbye.